Bounce around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Here we go. The days dwindle down to just a very few now on the legislative calendar here in Ontario. Welcome in. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. We record this session the morning of Thursday, November the 27th. And as we always say, things may have changed by the time you hear this. Having said that, things did change in the last week. We're going to get to some of that, I think, based on the conversation that we had last week on the roundtable right here. But two things I want to talk about off the top. First, thanks to those of you who stepped up and have supported our efforts with the promise in support of St. Clair Inn. Just drawing back the curtain, we blew right through our fundraising goal. So thank you for those of you who stepped up. I know, it was good. It was good.
Great.
So, and I know that you are keenly aware of what goes on at St. Clair Inn, Kathleen, Wynne, and that those are the they do really important work. They punch above their weight. So. All of this for transitional housing for homeless women in
it's one of those
Toronto.
It's one of those small gems of a program and a refuge for women. So good for you guys for supporting it.
Well, there's a whole bunch of people who obviously stepped up and did the least they could do, as I like to say, and it made a huge difference. So thanks to you for doing that. Around the table, I should start there. John Wright is here. He is the CEO at Canada Insight. Is it Insights? Pulse? I can't read it. I can't hear you, John.
Are we miming today's show?
Oh, yeah. How ridiculous. Yeah. Canada Pulse Insight.
Pulse Insight. There we go. There we go.
I wouldn't have got that one either.
Good.
Yeah, it was like hand puppets.
You got to wiggle your ear. Sounds like.
Yeah, it was like hand puppets.
I thought you were pointing to your watch.
Well, it's not my wallet.
Watch what you say.
Former Premier Kathleen Wynne is here. Tim Hudak is the former leader of the PC Party of Ontario. And Keith Leslie is our political commentator. You hear and see him on CHTV. So thanks again on the pitching in on the efforts for St. Clair Inn. But I stumbled across a really important post on LinkedIn this week, and it was penned by Tim. And it was all about your daughter, Tim. And I thought I tell that story because I was just blown away by your post on LinkedIn.
Very moving.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Dave, Keith. You put me on the spot here, man. This is emotional. This is bad for my hard-ass conservative image here. It's off-brand, Trafford. So I'll see what I do. It's easier to write than to say. There was a really special moment for all of us in the family and also the kids at Loretto Abbey School, which is in North Toronto, part of our Toronto Catholic system is where Miller went to school, where she got invited back to speak to the honor roll students at her school. Miller now at college, learning to be an early childhood educator. So that's significant for any family. But what was particularly significant for Miller is that she's had a significant speech disability her entire life. She was born with something called apraxia, which I had never heard of until Miller. And what apraxia means, basically, I mean, the main segment of it is that you can understand things perfectly, but when you try to communicate back, to say something back, between your brain and out the mouth, it gets really jumbled. And for a good part of Miller's, early life, we thought she would never have a normal conversation. We used to do a thing with her. It's getting emotional already. Where you give her choices, right? Where other kids her age would be talking, for breakfast. For the breakfast food, you would say, do you want to have blueberries or banana or strawberry? And I made the choice. I thought that she liked Be My Head because she liked then to hit her dad in the head to indicate what she wanted to have. And we moved from there to like a picture card where she could point out things that she, wanted to say. And then when she could start to read, she had what we call the talking computer, basically an iPad because kids drop these things with heavy protection. So it's a plastic device, which she'd use to communicate to family, to friends, in class. And one of the challenges too, where other kids, you know, at an early age are developing vocabularies and love talking, like little chatterboxes. Miller was on a talking computer, and that's isolating, very isolating. But really, because a lot of early two things, you know, early intervention. A lot of service went to Holland Liberty School, which was excellent. We should have more like that across the province. Countless agonizing hours of speech pathology for the poor girl, and a strong advocate in her mom. Mm. So the good news is, went through high school, she made honor roll, and she gets invited back to do a speech. And she did great. A 5-minute speech from the podium to her class, inspirational message about perseverance, overcoming challenge, being beyond ordinary. And for most human beings, making a speech in front of a packed house, about 200 people there, students and parents, that's scary enough. But imagine for most of your life, you couldn't even talk, and to get up there and have that courage. So when the principal invited her back, like, I was really interested, is Miller going to take this on? And man, she rose to the occasion. She made us so proud, and see her former students give her a big hug at the end and say, "Great job, Miller." That was just awesome. It's really cool in life when you know, you get to a point where your kids inspire you.
Sorry to put you through that, but you know what? That's such an important story, and congratulations to you and thanks. Deb and the family, and it's just such an awe-inspiring story.
Gotta feel great, Tim, for you and Deb both.
Yeah, just amazing.
Thanks. And what's great too, you know, just a last point in the story is that she wants to give back now, right? She wants to be an ECE and specialize in helping kids with special needs.
Yeah, I love that in there. You know, you quoted her: "Be remembered by your deeds. Be a lifelong learner. Be more than ordinary."
Exactly.
And you know, if we all aspired to Miller's advice, be a kinder place, this world.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. No, thanks for asking.
Tim, congratulations. Tim and I and Deb, we lived in the same neighborhood for a number of years, and Tim and I would see each other on, you know, morning walks, runs, whatever. But I also saw Deb on a number of occasions when Miller was very little, and we talked about education, and she was looking for programs. And I just want to do a shout out to her too, Tim, because such a testament to her, and you said that, I mean, to her perseverance and both of you just, you know, creating an environment where Miller could flourish. It's just remarkable, and congratulations. And the story is beautiful and good for her. Yay, Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Deb was incredible, and just never giving up, and making sure every, you know, service we could squeeze out of the system, pay through our own pocket, be there with her, coaching all the way through that. See how far she's come.
Excellent.
Yeah, and just for everybody else who's listening or watching right now, just keeping in mind that you never know what's going on next door. Even though you might live close to people, or you might think you know them, you don't necessarily. So, like I said, the whole message behind this for me, Tim, was not just about the extraordinary courage and resilience that all of you showed, but particularly Miller exhibits, but this level of deep kindness. I think that's what at the heart of her message. And the more I listen to what's going on politically here in this world, in this country, in this province, in this city, I think that the necessary platform for the next winning party candidate should actually be one of kindness. The more I see what goes on in the United States, if a party came out and said, our platform is kindness, I know that sounds really mushy, but we need that more than anything right now. Period. Stop right there. And we would cut through so much BS as far as what goes on politically, or, you know, the bipartisan this and bipartisan that. Man, I just wish we could inject a little bit more of that into the vernacular politically. And John, you're the pollster, you're the pulse guy. I think that would be one of those things that catches on, that would cross all party lines without sounding, you know, Pollyanna-ish, We need this in our lives desperately right now. Beyond hope, we need kindness.
Yeah, we do. And I want to come back to about what Tim was talking about. There's very little language that approximates the combination of courage and anxiety. And as a parent who's gone through some challenges with our own kids, I can only imagine. There's a German phrase that says "Mut trotz Angst," and it kind of sums it up when you're trying to carry not only something like what Tim and Deb have gone through, and Miller has gone through as well, but it takes up an enormous amount of your effort when you're trying to carry out a normal life, and then you add to that the kind of lives that Deb and Tim have. So it's an extraordinary feat when you think about the years that it takes to do that. And you're absolutely right. Kindness is something that is measured. The happiness index is measured around the world, and it's really missing. I have to say that in doing the polling, people talk about the Trump administration and how they're not going to the United States because of how they feel about the Trump administration. But it was evident, even our family as Formula One fanatics. We follow it. In fact, we were 3 years ago, we were at the first evening of the Grand Prix in Las Vegas. And it's dropped from 324,000 on that first night that we were there in swelling Las Vegas to 306,000 last year, and dropped to 180,000 this year. And they attributed most of the drop to the fact that Canadians simply weren't coming. And I would think that, you can be pro-Canadian and that people have, been very concerned about how we're going to be threatened. But I have to tell you that when you're on social media and you see how ICE and Border Patrol, in fact, are ripping families apart, it's a nightly factor when you kind of scroll through, and maybe it's my algorithm when you see this. There is no kindness that seems to exist in south of the border, and it seems to be more of a Canadian trait here. But it is what the world needs right now. It needs that respect. It needs patience. It needs kindness. And it can be driven by the most powerful country in the world, not just in our own backyard. And that's a shame, because for many years, the United States was the land of hope and of compromise and of doing the right thing. But when you're taking away food stamps and you're taking away people and you're deporting them, even this week, there were close to 40 of them from the United Kingdom who were put in detention and being sent back. It sends a signal, and it sends a signal that we've got to be closer together, and we've got to try and get through this together, as opposed to being apart and being critical of each other.
Yeah, and we're into the season of giving, so it's just a really important, I think, tone to set, not just to do it because of the month. But go ahead, Keith.
I think we need to take it even a step further. It's not just kindness, it's compassion. And that's what we're really seeing a lack of in the United States. And we see these ICE agents going in, standing at family courthouses where the families are there to register to go through the process, and they're being arrested the minute the judge says, no, we're going to postpone whatever. They're being arrested there. The rest of us look at these scenes. We see kids being taken from their mothers, both sides crying, and they're ripping the families apart. There's no compassion. We need kindness, absolutely. But I think a compassion party would actually have a whole lot more to say to things. We need to have people showing empathy, showing that what we're seeing on their screens every night just isn't acceptable. And we are seeing municipalities and state levels, governments trying to fight back against this. But when we see these images every night of what ICE is doing in the United States, just to say, terrorizing people, stopping them in the street, smashing their car windows, dragging them out through the window while their kids are crying in the back seat, all this kind of stuff, that was the kind of behavior we never would have expected to see of Americans of any sort. I mean, let alone law enforcement who are being paid huge dollars and big bonuses to go out and round people up because they happen to be, well, they look kind of like they're an immigrant, whatever that means to some people. They're just going to go out and round anybody up. And then, if you happen to be actually an American citizen, well, no apologies, just get on with your way, get out of our hair. It's just this complete lack of compassion that I find quite stunning. I mean, kindness, yes, we need that for sure. And we see that in the younger generation. We see kids today, Timmy mentioned how Miller was given a group hug by all the students. I mean, There were no group hugs when I went to school, at least not that I saw. Kids today are far more empathetic and they have far more compassion, I think, about these situations. So that's a good sign of it. But overall, I think in addition to kindness, we really need politicians to start showing compassion, wearing your heart on your sleeve, saying this kind of behavior is just unacceptable and it tears us apart.
Yeah, well, and a shout out to the folks at Loretto Abbey. There's a lot of Abbey girls in my life. My wife is an alumna, and my daughter and my sister-in-law, and so yeah, a lot of time for the folks at Loretto Abbey. Okay, so talking about things may have changed by the time you hear this. Last week we spent a good deal of our time talking about a pet peeve of mine, which was that my recycling bin was considerably heavier every week than it had been, say, 3 or 4 months ago. And why? Well, because the beer stores have closed near me, and certainly at our cottage, it's closed in the little community near the lake. So you end up collecting all of these freaking bottles and no place to bring them back that's convenient. So why isn't the LCBO doing this? That was our question last week. We did a Twitter poll. 80% of the people who responded to the poll, by the way, said the LCBO should be taking these back.
Wow.
This morning, as we record this, we're led to believe that the Ontario beer stores are prepared. Yeah, you know what? We'll take the empties back. Doesn't really solve the problem because it's still status quo based on my own experience. There are more liquor stores in my neighborhood than there are beer stores. So why aren't the liquor stores taking back the bottles? But I think it's interesting. This really sparked a bit of a reaction. I had an email from Sarah Thorne. She said the answer is the Lions Club. We have 2 places in Dorset to drop off empty bottles and beer cans in Dorset. I have a neighbor on my street who collects, and based on what the Dorset guys have told me, it could be pretty lucrative. I asked the volunteers at one of the collection places. They raised $46,000 for the Lions Club in Dorset last year based on, the beverage behavior of the folks locally. But there are answers, Tim. Right. And to say, this is kind of contrary to our deal with the beer store, it doesn't solve the problem as far as I'm concerned, because as you pointed out last week, this is still going to put unnecessary stress on the recycling program right across the province.
So, as we've noted before, Dave Trafford, Minister Bethan Falvey is a regular listener to our show. So no sooner did you stream it than I was corrected for what I said. So I've got my notes here.
All right.
to correct the record. So basically, the case the government will make is first of all, it's important to put the beer bottles, I'll say, through the beer store system because they use them like 12 to 15 times. So it's basically like glass gold. And if they go through the Blue Box program, it gets recycled in the glass, but it doesn't get used in the beer store system. And it's probably one of the most successful recycling programs in North America, is like 80+%, in return. So I think the government is trying to be careful to protect that. They're certainly conscious too of the beer store, because the beer stores, are now in decline with retail of beer in grocery stores and corner stores. So I think it helps keep that system going. And the case also is, so grocery stores that sell beer and wine are still going to be held responsible. They can either take the license, in which case they have to recycle, or they don't take alcohol. And it's just simply giving them a new option that says, well, you can recycle and you can contract that out to the beer store. And in return, the grocery has to pay 17 cents a beer bottle or beer can to the beer store to help support the system. So we'll argue that's a market-based solution that will help keep a strong recycling system going. The issue I have remains the same, though, that I get that it's going to encourage that behavior, keep more glass in the system from recycling. You really, though, need to do something more for the consumer, like you, Dave, to incent them to get there, because there are fewer beer stores out there. So I really think 2 things. Great, okay, I get this, but add another option into the system. Like I've seen in the States where, others recycle, they use technology, recycle the bottles, you get money, you go in the grocery store, you pay it, whatever. So that's another consumer-based incentive, because you make it convenient and a financial incentive for people. And number 2, put more into that stream. So if there's an alternative to the beer store for collecting bottles, you need to have more in that stream. So, whether it's Coca-Cola in a bottle or Labatt Blue, why can't I return that exact same glass and be rewarded with a dime for it?
Well, and John, you go back to the days when we were kids. You'd go and collect bottles, and you'd take them back for the 2-cent deposit. I mean, this isn't something new. This isn't a new idea. But to make the point, though, the LCBO sells more than 1 billion liters of beverage a year. So there's not a chance that combined the grocery stores, beer stores are actually going to outsell the liquor store. And they are off the hook. They don't have to take the bottles back. Doesn't make sense to me.
Let me tell you why it's not going to work. And it goes back to the first segmentation studies that were undertaken on the environment and personality within that scope back in the 1990s. And that is that there's a thin group a thin portion of people in this province and across this country who really want to have a mark on the environment. It would be roughly about 13% who would actively participate in those sort of activities. They go out of their way to make sure that not only their blue box is full, but they also, and there's a bleed over for another 13% or so who are in that category, but they tailor a lot of their lives to make sure that the environment is respected and that their habits are taken into account. That leaves about 75% of people, and even higher when it's just the 13% who are doing things. Going to the beer store was a destination to pick up something. And as a result, you went there pretty much all the time because that's where you went for beer, and you were able to simply exchange your empties for the beer you were picking up. I don't have to do that anymore. What I have available to me are corner stores, convenience stores. I can get it at the gas station. I can get it at the grocery stores. I can do all of that, and so we are now going to have a commercial. We're going to have a payment to a system where I'm not going to go specifically to a beer store to drop off my empties and pick up something else. And as a result, a lot of this, as we all know, revolves around convenience. And as a result, my blue bins will continue to be filled up because while the statement can be made that, there's going to be a beer store within 10 kilometers of where I live, there are a lot of people in my neighborhood who will simply walk to the end of the driveway and put it in that blue box. So, we can talk about how this is a good deal for the commercial interests and for the province and putting, at least having a place for people to go. But it means that you're going to drop off the bottles as opposed to an exchange of service and product. And as a result, I just don't think it's going to work for 75 to 80% of people.
Well, Keith, it stopped working for me just because I don't go to the beer store anymore. I buy my beer at the LCBO.
Yeah.
Well, that's really the core of the problem, isn't it? And as for the LCBO not taking back bottles, they actually have the warehouse space, the ability to do this. They could absolutely do this, unlike some of the small retailers. It's unrealistic to expect them to be able to take back empties and handle them and get them back to the beer store. This idea, though, of doing something a private sector solution, as Tim says, to try and keep the beer store in the recycling business, especially for beer bottles, I think is really important because the recycling rate is, highest in the world, quite frankly, and it's very impressive. On the other hand, what we have is, you say, the convenience factor of it, people just putting it at the end of their driveway. And let's face it, for most people in most cities now in Ontario, if you put recyclables at the end of your driveway that actually have a deposit on them, they won't be there by the time the recycle truck comes around. Someone is coming to your neighborhood. I would suspect it happened when I was living in Cabbagetown. Every garbage day, a recycling day, someone was coming around, 2 or 3 people, quite frankly, if they weren't there early enough, checking out the bottles, going through and getting all the recycling. We used to put our wine bottles and whatnot in a separate bag for them so they could just make it easier to get them to go. You don't have to do this. It's a convenience, and it doesn't have to go back to recycling. They'll take it to where it needs to go because they want the deposit money. I know that's preying on people who actually need the cash, but they're out there, and they will take those bottles and return them to the beer store because they do. They need the cash. The alternate thing, though, with the loss of the beer stores, when I was living in Cabbagetown, there was a beer store in all 4 compass points within a kilometer. Now, 2 of them are gone, and I suspect the third one will soon be. I saw a sign, it's going to be a condo very soon as well. So there's going to be fewer and fewer beer stores, and as we know, as of January, there's no minimum number required by the beer store to keep them open. So will there be enough around that's going to make it convenient? 10 kilometers is a heck of a long way to go, unless you're actually going to buy some beer, and then you can, as John says, exchange the bottles. Otherwise, I don't see a lot of people buying into this and taking especially their liquor bottles and their beer bottles back to the beer store when they can just put them at the end of the driveway and have someone pick them up and take them away.
Well, even Kathleen, when we look at where the LCBOs are typically located, I'll guarantee you within 10, 12, 15 steps, there's a grocery store where you bought the bottles to begin with. So there's no, like, in terms of the convenience and the locations and how they're set up, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me that at least we're not having the conversation still about the LCBO taking responsibility for the product that they're producing.
Yeah, so this all feels to me like a half measure and a sort of messy transitional spot along the road to probably very few, if any, beer stores in the future. I wonder what the brewers have been saying to government in terms of wanting to continue to have a role. I think that's probably an element of this, combined with the reluctance of the LCBO and the grocery stores to step up to their responsibility. So I don't think it's sustainable. I mean, I think, John, when you talk about, when you were going to the beer store anyway, it made sense to take your empties back. I mean, if you're going to the LCBO anyway, or you're going to the grocery store anyway, those are the places that it makes most sense to recycle. And I really like the idea of there being the ability to recycle these bottles. So as Tim has said, you can reuse them more than just one recycle. So I don't think this is going to last. I think it's going to be demonstrably not efficient. I wonder if there was a conversation about collection at the LCBO or at the grocery stores, because the beer stores are set up for the recycling, right? They can handle the bottles. I just wonder if there was a conversation about collection, but even that's not sustainable over time either, because you have this massive amount of glass being dumped every day. So I think we're in a transition, guys. I don't think this is going to last, and we'll see how long it takes until there's another scheme.
It certainly didn't pick up the steam that it was generated by Bill 60 this week and some colorful protests that went on in the House. And thought of you, Kathleen Wynne, telling us about the story of you getting kicked out of the legislature as an activist. So I don't know if you were cheering or you were triggered by what was going on.
Well, get a job business, and it's just so ridiculous. And there's been a whole conversation as a result of that about activists being paid, and then this business about the organizations being audited. I just think a government that doesn't understand that people are going to disagree with them and that we live in a democracy and you're allowed to express your displeasure. I mean, how many wind turbine protests did I attend? Did I have to go through when I was going to events when I was first the leader of the party? I mean, people disagree. They're going to express themselves. Government needs to listen. My response was to sit down with those people when I got to the event. My detail always wanted to go in the back door. I was like, no, we're going in the front door. I'm going to talk to the people who are upset, and we're going to have a conversation. We're probably not going to agree, but we're going to have the conversation. So I think getting angry at the protesters and lashing out is the absolute wrong thing to do. And it's a measure of, probably the government hasn't listened enough to the concerns of the people who are in the gallery.
Well, the activity in the gallery was epic. And we have to share it just because he has this whistle. This is just worth. You got to hear this. Yeah. Clear them all out. There you go. And for those of you who were listening, the guy who was blowing the whistle then was pretending he couldn't hear the security guard telling him to get out. And that's probably pretty close to true.
I damaged my hearing with this damn whistle. So what?
Exactly. Yeah, but the video again, Tim, of the premier kind of turning around and giving them stink eye and then tell them, get a job, buddy. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that's necessary, in as much as he had the majority, he had the votes, he could just drive this thing through the tunnel as he sees fit at whatever speed he wants. These folks were clearly under the premier's skin.
I love that he has the buddy too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's gotta be buddy.
So, I'll say two things on this. First, I remember in the early Mike Harris days where we had a considerable number of protests against the changes we were bringing in. And that's important in two respects. Number one, because Premier Doug Ford's dad, Doug Ford Sr., was part of the PC caucus. I sat with him from 95 to 1999. And I was in the house late at night. And I think it was night sitting. I think it was one of those times there was a bit of a filibuster, so to speak. We were going through the night, and the people in the gallery, and Doug Ford Sr. looks up, and he used to close one eye sometimes when he would talk. And he said, "Why don't you people go out and get a job?" So we've seen that line, I guess, carries to the family. I was in the house when that happened, made some headlines. Number two, that's actually a small protest. Like, I'm not being dismissive. People will have, their points of view. Although our Landlord-Tenant Act is badly out of whack, and it's a very significant disincentive for mom and pop investors to bring in quality housing and limits choices. All right. But you know what? That's not really that much of a protest. If that's all you can really get out, I don't think there was that much sentiment. Those whistles should be banned. That was god awful. But in terms of as protests go, that's not much.
Well, Keith, here's the question I have, and you probably follow this more closely than anybody. But to me, I don't know that there's anybody who likes this bill. Well, it doesn't matter whether you're a landlord or you're a tenant. So maybe the government got it right.
Well, maybe that change is a tough thing for everybody to take. But I think what both landlords and tenants seem to agree on is that the Landlord-Tenant Tribunal needs about quadruple the staff just to deal with the backlog they have right now, and they need way more funding. And otherwise, it's just frustrating for both sides. The government's changes here appear to favor landlords to some degree. The tenants, some tenant organizations, Acorn, obviously very concerned about it. But they wanted to hold their protest because there was no committee hearings on this. Where are they going to go but inside the legislature to voice their displeasure? As Premier Wynne said, you are allowed to disagree with the government, even if they do have a majority 3 times in a row. So that's what they were doing. They were protesting it in the House. Premier Ford turning up and saying, go find a job. I'm not surprised by him saying that, but he, to your point, he doesn't need to do that. He's got the government. It's all on his side. He could just ignore the protesters. They're going to get cleared out of the chamber, and the business will just go on. But they clearly did get under his skin, and I think it's perhaps because this government knows it's not listening to voters or opponents on virtually any issue. If there's going to be committee hearings, they're like 2 hours. Okay, then we'll have the vote. They're really, really clamping down on hearing dissenting voices or voices that might be in opposition to what they're doing. And I think it hurts the government overall, especially when they get really defensive like that. There was no need. This bill, as I say, there's critics on both sides of it. It does seem to favor the landlords to some degree, but for the most part, they backed off the major change, which was going to, do away with the permanent or the endless or permanent leases. After you do 12 months, you can stay in it indefinitely. The indefinite leases are going to be able to stay. So that was the big thing that was bad with the bill. But for the most part, the government is standing its ground because it can. Why they get so upset about the protest, I don't understand.
Well, John, you've got a new perspective on this lately. You're recently now a newly minted tenant. You have a landlord that you may or may not have to deal with.
Yeah, and it was by choice as opposed to necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, we look at society and we look at places in major urban centers, and there's a lot of people who, going through tough times. Both landlords and tenants have to make some really crucial decisions. I tend to, in these cases, not necessarily reflect on public opinion, nor my own personal circumstances, but really look to the tactics of the government. I mean, if you want to hold town hall meetings and talk about things, and you're a government member, you're going to have a lot of people who oppose you, who are going to organize and who are going to obviously take advantage of that. And as a result, I can understand from a tactical point of view why government doesn't want to have committee hearings, because it's just stacked with people who are going to be, calling it out and making demonstrations. And it's going to be over in no time at all if you simply have it in a bill and you are able to have a majority that just puts it out there. It also, when you couple that with the reforms to the bail system and some of the other justice matters, we're not talking about skills and who's getting money to promote them this week. It's a political phrase of turn the channel and turn up the volume. And so as a result, heading into a December 11th rise of the House that was scheduled, I think it probably still remains that way. This is the big distraction, plus the other one, where we're not talking about the issue that was engulfing the government before. So, yeah, it does have consequences for both renters and also for the landlords, especially nowadays, where someone can just stay in that residency and not pay the rent, and it's almost impossible to get back from what's not being paid by mom and pop shop investors who have decided to buy a house and rent it out. So it's a pretty tough thing. But I would say this, that inflaming it by, having a response to it that actually is more commentary about the government was not the right approach. And it just happened, but we will be through this in the next week or so, and then it won't be discussed as much as it has been in the last 48 hours.
Well, for all the effort, Kathleen, Wynne, that the government may be making to change the channel, as John says, they kind of stepped on it all over again by, the Premier coming out and talking about auditing, left-wing nonprofit organizations. I mean, the Minister of Irony must have been spinning in his seat, because the idea that this all came up around a conversation around skills development and the audits there doesn't make sense. That we want to make sure that the money's properly spent and what they got the money for, that's where it's going to go. And they have not been able to answer any of those questions, or refuse to answer any of those questions vis-a-vis skills development fund. Again, an unnecessary, unforced error.
Well, there's a sort of self-awareness gap in all of this, right? I mean, it's pretty much the case given the skills development fund. And you're right, Dave, in terms of, the lack of transparency there. On the part of the Premier, I read the book that he was written, or was ghostwritten or whatever, about him and his brother, and he talks about having gone to college for a term or something. There was a college strike. He quit and he walked into his dad's business. And for that Premier, who was born with a silver spoon, but some kind of spoon in his mouth, and for him to be telling people to get a job is just, it's just mind-boggling. It's really ridiculous. So he's losing his temper. He's short-tempered. He's not feeling great. Obviously, there's a lot going on. We were just talking about compassion and kindness, and to Keith's point about hearings. If you don't listen to people, then you're going to deal with the backlash. And I don't know why he doesn't understand that. I don't understand why he doesn't know that is part of the job, and wouldn't have had a way of finding his sense of humor or being able to just stay calm in that moment. So I think he's eager to get out of the House. I don't think he likes being there. I think it's been a really rough few weeks for them, and this is not going to take away. It's not going to be enough of a distraction. There's so much going on. There's the fact of the housing crisis and homelessness, and, reports about there being more people who are using drugs openly in the streets, and the shutting down of the supervised injection sites. And, I was just on the radio this morning talking to CBC Ottawa about Bill 33 and school trustees. So the government is at odds with a whole lot of sectors in the society, and it's showing in the demeanor of the Premier.
Just as a note, it's funny. I was looking at the legislative calendar, because we're trying to figure out exactly, where we're going to, when this is going to end up. I counted there were 13 weeks where the legislature sat in this calendar year. Now, admittedly, there was an election in there. But if you look ahead, they're promising to sit for 24 weeks next year. So, but whether or not that's going to make any difference in terms of listening to or having any kind of consultation is one thing. Tim, as we record this, I know the premier is supposed to be getting set for an announcement, and today something to the effect that's going to affect the Ring of Fire, which I think we'll be curious to see what comes out of that. But I want to combine that with things we're hearing across the country, because today as well, we're going to get this memorandum of understanding between Ottawa and Manitoba about a pipeline. We saw earlier in the week headlines that suggest that Ottawa and the provinces have agreed to streamline the reviews for major projects, particularly agreements with Ontario and Manitoba. Let me suggest that these aren't all by accident happening right now, that these were on the agenda for the feds all along. And I'm just kind of spitballing here. But if the budget had failed in Ottawa, we would have been a week and a half, 2 weeks into an election campaign. All of these things would have been interesting campaign announcements by the Prime Minister to say, hey, we're going to talk about a pipeline. Hey, we're going to talk about Ring of Fire. Hey, we're going to streamline big projects. So to some degree, the pressures on the Carney government, I think, are actually helping promote some of these big projects right across the country, and the big projects, specifically the treasures that the provinces are actually trying to put forward. Because to me, these things aren't going to happen without Ottawa. But at the same time, there was pressure on the Carney government to get stuff done, aside from the Trump thing. But these are things that are happening a lot faster than I would have expected in terms of some of these major announcements.
Yeah, and look, I remain an optimist, right? Despite a pretty crappy 2025 to date for Canadians on the trade relationship, I still remain an optimist, and this, I think, reinforces that for me. Could I go back a little bit though and give you some forward insight just on the last topic? I was hoping to jump in, and I'll be quick. So, two things. I've seen the premier in person. I've seen him at an event. Like, I don't think in any way he is shaken or thrown off his game. I think he's very much on game. And yeah, he's got a bit of a rough, unorthodox personality and says what's on his mind sometime, but he's always been like that. And I think he feels very much still that he's on game, and polls still reflect that. And then it is unfair, I think, to dismiss it. He's got a silver spoon in his mouth because his dad came from dirt, right? And his dad actually came from a very modest background, built a successful business. The boys were raised in that business, God bless them. But it could connect with an earlier thought, but it is a hard scrabble early existence. So the get a job instinct, as the sun rises over my shoulder, the get a job instinct, resembles where the Ford family comes from. So that's why I think you see both, whether you like it or not, that's why both dad and son go there. And my last point there on the legislative city, it is really unfortunate, Dave, though. I think we'd all agree. Each party now consecutively, whether you're orange, blue, or red, or blue again, has reduced the role of the opposition, has limited hearings, fewer seating days. And folks already talked about why that's a bad thing. I'll give you one more perspective. It means you spend less time together across the floor as well. Like Premier Wynne and I got to know each other on the circuit when you're on committees together and that sort of thing. It actually is a bonding, whatever party you're on. You find out that you all really want to actually make a better deal for the province, and it gets things solved. And that's a real deterioration, I think, we've seen by less time spent together, no matter what your party. To your main point, sorry about that aside. Look, I was always wondering if Prime Minister Carney was going to truly diverge from the Trudeau agenda, right? He got rid of the consumer carbon tax, but was that out of electoral convenience? Got rid of the DST, the digital sales tax, or is that just as a trade response, and the EV mandate was an overreach and jeopardizing auto? But this is, it gives me faith. This is a genuine move away from the excesses of the Trudeau regime. I think a reflection where Canadians are, that we should actually, in as environmentally friendly way as possible, benefit from our resources to create good, well-paying jobs, to keep that wealth in Canada and not give it to regimes that are outside of our country. So good for Prime Minister Carney, despite some disruption in his caucus, from doing one project, one process, cooperating with the provinces, getting things built again so we can move and create better jobs.
Well, what's interesting to me, John, is that the Prime Minister is the champion in the view of so many of the premiers. The premiers are all fighting amongst themselves. I mean, everybody's got their guns trained on Premier Eby, whether it's for potash or for the pipeline for oil. But to me, this is kind of the the process that we expected. Again, I go back to the point. This is happening a lot faster than I would have thought in terms of how things have been happening here politically, federally, provincially.
Yeah, I suppose. It's fascinating. Again, we started off the program talking about the environment. It's fascinating that we've taken 10 years of climate change being at almost the top of the public agenda and just kind of said, okay, that's over now. Let's move on to the next thing. Secondly, the confluence of issues. I mean, we do have a public who is willing to accept all kinds of internal compromise because of what's south of the border, and secondly, because the economy is running into all kinds of rough patches, and they want to see, a prime minister lead the country in cooperation with the premiers. It's also notable that Danielle Smith, in terms of the upcoming convention where she was going to be reviewed, the referendum question is now off the table. And whether or not this, comes to fruition in terms of whether anybody's going to step up to fund a pipeline, that actually is not really the issue anymore. It's about whether British Columbia is going to be the gateway, and the Indigenous populations are going to be, in sync to allow that to take place. So we're not through this at all, but there's the appearance of cooperation. There's the appearance of moving forward. There's the appearance of trying to solve some of the issues. So you can see we're not just really talking about Alberta as the West. We're talking about the Wests, because it really is about Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, and British Columbia altogether. It'll be up to now the three premiers in those Western provinces to put pressure on the Premier of British Columbia, and we've got leaders of parties who are on this podcast, but that sounds to me like if Premier Eby wants to go to the public for a consultation and have an election, that's a pretty interesting ballot question right there to get backed up on. So I don't think we're anywhere close to the fruition of this, but the Prime Minister has managed to put it now in the ball court of the provinces by saying, we're with you, win or tied, and we'll see what happens next.
Kathleen, Wynne, the idea, though, that all of these are happening at the same time. Again, there seems to be a lot of momentum around big projects, big issues, big transitional ideas that aren't just on paper anymore. I mean, I realize, Poilievre's going to talk about the PR stunt and waving the MOU around, and, it doesn't go any further than that. But the momentum around the conversation, that is to say, it's on the front burner on so many files, to me is extraordinary. Now, maybe I've missed something.
No, I think that the Prime Minister has moved very quickly to build relationships, to get to a place where these things are coming together. But I think it is a really important cautionary note that there's not necessarily a shovel in the ground on any of these things. And not that I would expect there would be by now, but there are lots of hurdles before that happens. And so the necessary foundation is being built by the Prime Minister, but there are lots of voices, as John has just said, that could be raised between now and the time that these projects actually do get built. I mean, we've talked about the Ring of Fire on here many times, and the fact that there'll be a streamlined environmental assessment, that is a process that could speed things up. But I don't know what the relationship with First Nations is, and the fact that it's just the province that's going to be engaged in that streamlined process it's a challenge, right? Because the relationship hasn't been that great. If I think about Ontario and First Nations people, that it's not been a great relationship in the last 8 years. So I think there are still lots of challenges, but I do agree that the setting of the table, the building of the foundation for these things to go forward has proceeded very quickly, as the Prime Minister said it would. He said this is what he was going to do. I think, there are still hills to climb before there's fruition.
But even at hills to climb, Keith, the emphasis here for me now is he's saying, okay, I agree. That's a good idea. Let's make it happen. And he's going to go as far as he can go. Now it's up to Premier X, whoever it happens to be. Now it's in your court. Mm-hmm. Deal with it.
That will go
Figure it
so
out.
far. That's going to go so far, though. Yes, and we've got the premiers lobbying each other and working with each other to get their favorite things dealt with here. But eventually, the prime minister is going to have to make a decision if we can't get British Columbia on side with a pipeline to get Alberta's resources to market to other markets in the United States. It's one thing to say, you know, the premiers are working this out and they're all have their own projects to put forward. But Eby's made it quite clear he does not want this to happen. He's going to stand in the way. And at some point, the prime minister is going to have to decide whether he's going to overrule a province, and he's not going to want to have that done if Eby has some sort of election or referendum on the issue. Prime minister is not going to want to have to deal with that. So the prime minister is going to have to make a decision about what's going to happen here. And to Premier Wynne's point, it's not just the province of BC as well. It's also going to be all the First Nations that have made it very clear, many of them, they do not want anything to do with the pipeline going into their territories because of the dangers and the worries about a spill. So this is a big, big issue for the prime minister to do. He's laying out the groundwork now, saying, here's the projects, I'm ready to go. We'll give you the support. The approvals will get through as quick as we can. That's all exactly what we need to see. And it also, you know, this push for Canadian manufacturing and Canadian content. We saw the report yesterday from Ontario's Financial Accountability Officer. The manufacturing base in Ontario is now the lowest it's ever been since they started measuring in 1976, below 10% of the workforce. So Ontario needs the manufacturing sector to come back in a big way. And the Prime Minister's projects, you know, if they're using the Canadian steel and Canadian all the other components, this is going to help us get our economy back on track a lot quicker. It's exactly the kind of plan we need to see. But to the point that's been made, the shovels are not in the ground yet, and they won't be for a little while.
Yeah, and I wonder whether or not at some point, Tim, the prime minister may have caught some of the premiers flat-footed, not expecting to get a yes on some of these things so quickly.
That could be true. Again, you know, great to see. And Premier Smith, who was, you know, heavily criticized for advocacy for the province, seems to be now on the winning side, at least with momentum. I'll be a bit of the voice in the wilderness on this. It's fun to, I guess, to be there and be alone with the squirrels from time to time. But, you know, I chose the University of Washington for my master's degree in economics because it was a real specialty in macroeconomics and trade. And that's what I was interested in at the time. Believe it or not, I ended up, you know, getting my master's thesis in an obscure field called advanced microeconomics. I won't bore you with that. But I was attracted to the school. And so what I do worry about, though, is that you're now going to have a domino effect. The Americans have changed the trade order and we're impacted. So then we protect our industry by stopping foreign steel from coming into our country. Yeah. And that's a natural political reaction. All parties probably align with that approach right now. And then another country's impacted. And then they'll close their borders to our, you know, food products and such. So, geez, I get the political instinct, but it's actually taking us down a dangerous path in the long run.
Yeah, well, to say it's complicated, to understate it. Just before we go, I know we talked about Mr. Bethlen Falvey and his team watching, listening, and others at the park listening. I swear to God, I thought Robin Urbach was taking a page out of your script this week, Tim. Writes about two-tier healthcare. She said not to. For those of us who think that there's a universal healthcare, we're kind of living in a dream world. To quote her, the headline is "Canadians are protecting the mirage of single-tier healthcare. It doesn't exist." Quote, "These people are zealously protecting the idea of a healthcare system that doesn't actually exist in this country, as if we're operating a Bentley when we're actually driving around in a clunky old Honda Civic, one that keeps breaking down and actually costs more than a Bentley to maintain." And I bring it up because, of course, Tim equates our healthcare system to a broken down jalopy. So we're there, but it keeps making the headline. And at some point, John, and I know you've been banging this drum for a long time in terms of how we're going to have need a reset reckoning in healthcare. Robin's exactly right. This is kind of the delusion that we've kind of all wandered through life with, that we have this healthcare system that is better than many others, but certainly not as good as we think it is.
Well, I'll bang the drum one more time, and even if the minister wants to have lunch and talk about it, I'm happy to do so. I think, of course, we are seeing already the reckoning of a healthcare system in terms of its funding and utilization, and you go all the way back to the history of our healthcare, and it's not, and how it's structured across this country, and it's not sustainable, not the way it's funded, the way it is. And I think people are just scared, policy people, to talk about what's going to come within 10 years. It's not like 60 years or 40 years or 20 years. It's 10 years from now, where those people who are the age of 85 or so are going to be costing an enormous amount of money. Hospitals will have to actually be funded even more, or the formula changed. And that you balance off of, again, we're looking at refurbishment of nuclear plants and the cost of, what is it, $26 billion there, a healthcare system which is going to be beleaguered with long-term care beds all of the things around that are going to have to be dealt with for the growing and aging population that nobody is talking about. And I think they're just damn scared to even go near it. We have a fiscal reality, not only in this province, but in across the country and federally, where we're just bleeding dollars every day. And, we've boxed ourselves into a circumstance where affordability is the most important issue. Getting elected, of course, is always on the minds of people. And so raising taxes or putting in healthcare surcharges or whatever you want to call it is just not on the menu. But you're right, Dave, there is a time of reckoning that is coming. And it doesn't look, I don't want to be the Debbie Downer on this, sorry, Tim, I didn't mean to say that. I don't want to be, because she's always up and cheerful. But I want to say that behind all of these measures, while we can tout and say everything is good, from a fiscal point of view, and we'll make our surplus here, there, and everywhere, there are huge amounts of money that we're not talking about, that we're not dealing with, and it's going to be focused on the healthcare system. So whatever Danielle Smith is doing right now, regardless of how it may turn out both for people and whether legislatively or constitutionally it can be done, we're going to have to cross that bridge everywhere across this country, as opposed to just in Alberta.
Yeah, we have to have the conversation in a very raw and I dare say, Keith, a mature way that, we're typically not ready to do, and we haven't been historically.
I agree with everything John just said. And as for being willing to discuss it, we need to discuss the fact we do have a two-tier healthcare system. 80% of the Canadian population lives within 100 kilometers of the U.S. border? You can take your money and go get your healthcare treatment there if you need it, if you want it. Let's keep our system completely public. I know Tim and I are going to disagree on this, but I do agree with Tim that we are trying to keep a jalopy on the road, and it needs, some fundamental overhaul. But I think it must be done completely in the public sector with better funding, better per capita funding, more tied to inflation every year, all these sorts of things, because it's not been. The funding has fallen farther and farther behind, and we're seeing situations where no one wants to go to the hospital anymore. We're hearing about waiting times in hospitals of over 24 hours in emergency departments just to get seen by a doctor. How many people are leaving to go home? It's studies every day telling us all these kinds of dangerous things about our healthcare system. It absolutely needs to be overhauled, maybe from the top down, bottom up, I'm not sure. But we don't need to kid ourselves that we need private sector healthcare, because we have it in the United States, and we can cross the border and get whatever healthcare we need if you can afford it. If not, let's stick to our public healthcare system in Canada.
Well, Kathleen,
I have a prop, Dave.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I know it's not allowed in the legislature, but here. If we have done all the things that experts, so this is a book called Better Now by Dr. Danielle Martin. She's at Women's College. I use it in my public policy course. So if we fix our primary care system, if we make sure that we organize and distribute surgeries in a rational way so that people are not waiting in line to see specialists, but we actually redistribute in a systemic way the access to surgeries. If we deal with homelessness and hunger, so she has 6 big ideas that she talks about in the book, and one of them is a basic income, because when she wrote the book, there was clear evidence, and there is even more evidence now, that we are dealing with many people are accessing the healthcare system because the social determinants of health have not been dealt with. So I would say to Tim and to Danielle Smith, if we do all those things and we still are in a situation where the healthcare system is not living up to our expectations, then let's have the conversation about privatization. But we haven't done the fundamentals. We haven't dealt with the issues that we know are putting the healthcare system under siege. We also know that for urgent and critical care, our healthcare system works. It's for the chronic, persistent, some of the aging issues that John talked about. Those are the areas that we have really fallen down. And I would say dealing with chronic poverty. So if we can do all that stuff, then, then let's have the conversation. But we push those issues off issues that we know are the ones that beleaguer the healthcare system, and people like Danielle Smith leap to, well, let's just move to a private system. It's an abdication of responsibility. It doesn't follow the evidence, and it will put us in a weaker situation in terms of the health of our society. So let's do all those things, and then we'll have the conversation.
Well, but the point, though, is that we have not universally made universal health care a priority. I mean, at that level that you're talking about. And right now, Tim, we're spending as much or more on servicing debt than we are on health care, in some cases. So, boy, we've made spending priorities way beyond anything that Kathleen Wynne is talking about.
I think one of the reasons we have so much debt is because we spend so much on healthcare. The other side of the story is that the fact that healthcare has taken up an increasing proportion of the budget over the last number of decades since Medicare was brought in means that less has been invested in transportation or other infrastructure, less into helping out people with disabilities or education. It is the big giant around the cabinet table. And every dollar that goes there is a dollar that doesn't go somewhere else. A friend of mine who was involved in the Harris government in healthcare and plays a role today in public policy and says, Tim, the issues that we talked about even 3 decades ago are the same issues today. You just add on 2 zeros. I just got to say, though, I'm happy that Team Jalopy is taking on more passengers. We've got some momentum. Eventually, we'll be proven right. A little fun fact, I'm a huge fan of Robin Urback. So when you sent me that column, I got a real kick out of it because I like her style, I like the way she thinks, and I like the way she writes. But, we all did this. I did get my chance to put my list out. Kathleen Wynne was chosen by the people of Ontario. But I had my list of my cabinet and key staff, and Robin Urback was top of my list to be involved in my media and communications side. I wish I had the chance to offer her a job because I think she's a tremendous talent.
Well, clearly on the Team Jalopy bench anyway, so that's all good. Listen, we'll leave it there, and thanks for all the input, John Wright, Kathleen Wynne, Keith Leslie, Tim Hudak. I'm Dave Trafford. This is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, and if in fact you are watching on YouTube or you're listening on one of the podcast apps, make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button, and the notification will pop up. You'll know exactly when the next episode is ready and available. Otherwise, feel free to share it. There may be somebody in your life who would be just geeky enough to get involved in these hour of in the weeds conversations about Ontario politics. And by the way, you can also listen on AM 800 at CKLW in Windsor and at News Talk 1010 in Toronto. I'm Dave Trafford. Thanks for joining us and enjoy your weekend.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.